At least 30 people were killed in Nigeria over the weekend when suspected suicide bombers attacked a mosque and a market. There was no immediate claim for the blast, but authorities suspect the Islamist militant group Boko Haram. Saturday's attacks came one day after new Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari promised during his inaugural address to eradicate what he called the mindless, godless militants of Boko Haram and rescue the hundreds of women and children being held captive. Mr. Buhari says Boko Haram is the most immediate threat faced by the country, and the military would intensify its offensive against the terrorist group. Now, for more insight into the security challenges facing President Buhari, I am joined by Mohammad Rahim, an African analyst and counter-violent extremism researcher. Mr. Rahim, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, absolutely, very much.
Now, everybody expected Mr. Buhari to anticipate Boko Haram to be perhaps the biggest challenge that faces his administration. What can he do differently?
The president right now has an opportunity to really set the stage internationally, domestically, and regionally to say to the world that Nigeria has a change. Nigeria will reclaim its leadership position in the world and combat in a very organized, meticulous, structured fashion against these extremist elements. And one of the most important and salient points to highlight is that this is not part of the Nigerian history, nor is it part of the Islamic rich tradition in Nigeria and the larger sub-region.
Now, we know Nigeria has the biggest military in the West African region. Is this just about going militarily and blasting these guys out of their hideouts, or can there be another dimension in the strategy?
The military approach is just one small part. It requires real, tangible community policing activities as well. Education is at the core of this. As you know, the government can only do but so much, but it requires faith-based leaders. It requires the Islamic community as well to look at this, to solve this issue internally and work collaboratively with international partners who can work to combat this extremism.
Some would say, well, this kind of strategy was employed by the former President Goodluck Jonathan. There were times, actually, they were even conducting talks with leaders of Boko Haram. They have said they've worked with community leaders, even religious groups. What is it that they missed that made Boko Haram become what it has become?
I think that the Jonathan administration was only able to carry on the tradition of what he inherited. He inherited a situation in which the previous president passed away, and he was trying to stabilize the country. So certainly he did his best. But Buhari, a seasoned military man, a seasoned policymaker who understands the concerns of Nigeria, and so they are in a key position to show and reclaim that Nigeria is in a position of being serious about business, and particularly as it relates to combating this extremist issue. That's not just, again, a Nigeria issue, but a larger sub-region, an international issue as well.
You do research in violent extremism. We're seeing a growth of this, beast called ISIS. And now Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab, all those are kind of conducting things that are very similar to each other. What would you say is feeding this kind of flame that seems to be almost consuming parts of the world?
I think there's an issue of education. Of course, we can look at other issues, illiteracy and unemployment, but education is at the core of it. If we look at ISIL and very much look at the larger issues that are at place, it's a lack of understanding from the very beginning of individuals who are learning at their religious educational centers as children. Yeah. So if we can combat, if ISIL has a Cub Scout group, then if we can come up with a narrative with young people that organically they take ownership with well-informed parents, well-informed religious leaders, well-informed communities at large, then we can have a generational change and address this soft power approach, which will have long-standing sustainable solutions.
And it's good you mentioned the soft power. How can it apply? For example, if you looked in the past, it used to be that terrorist groups would isolate some few people, a few boys, and try to kind of influence them into these extremist ideologies. But now you get a sense that this is becoming a kind of a mass recruitment, a brazen recruitment in mosques and in towns and places across the globe. Why? Why is it happening this way this time?
Well, I think there's a larger, what's the alternative? So that places the burden intra-community issues, Muslim communities in particular, because right now we're dealing with a threat that Muslim communities have to take ownership. And how do you address this? You come up with real programmatics from the very beginning inside the mosque and come with critical thinking, come with educational initiatives, work empower women, work empower young people. And from that issue, then we can replicate this globally. But the issue also is not just a counter narrative, it's an alternative narrative. Reintroducing a whole new framework for these young people, for adults, and providing an alternative narrative in which they can see as the new normal, and in many respects, the new Muslim cool.
In few words, what can you say is the role of the international community, say a country like the U.S.?
Well, I think the U.S. and Western partners are doing all that they can. The role of funding and donor support is clearly there, but technical assistance can really do a major, can assist tremendously for these communities. So continue with that larger coalition building, but also getting at the root cause of working with different communities, as I mentioned to you, women and children. That's going to be very vital for the future.
Well, Mohammad, thank you very much
Absolutely.
For joining us today. Mohammad Rahim is an African expert and analyst and counter-violent extremism researcher.